everyone. I hope that you're having a great week. So, this week, as you're well aware, is fall break. I just wanted to kind of jump on here and explain what we're going to be working on for the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned in a unit overview, we are going to be diving into behavior. So, week 7 and 8 will be behavior. However, it's such a large component and things that we talk about in student behavior and those with special needs, especially in an inclusive classroom, that we really need to spend 2 weeks talking about this. So week 7, the week that we're in now, we're really going to be diving into classroom management and student behavior. We're going to look at how do we support the students in the classroom. So what is that positive behavior support? And we're going to look specifically at learners with emotional and behavioral disorders. So our main objectives is how do we develop rules in accordance with a school-wide support plan, and what does that look like? We're also going to look at what is a hypothesis. So you're going to write a hypothesis, a function based on a functional behavioral assessment. So you're going to learn what a functional behavior assessment is and how do we look at the function of that behavior assessment and write a hypothesis based on that. So we're going to learn about that these next 2 weeks. We're also going to be looking at preventive strategies, right? So the point of classroom management is to prevent behaviors before they actually happen. How do we replace these behaviors that the student is displaying in class? And how do we teach them? So how do they learn this replacement skill? And how do we put a new consequence in place during this behavior intervention plan? So you're going to learn about what a behavior intervention plan is and how is it connected to the functional behavior assessment. So when we're looking at our textbook, you're going to have to read one chapter from each textbook. There's a lot of great information. Behavior is something that all teachers have to deal with. Unfortunately, when you have students who have special needs, sometimes those behavior issues come along with the types of disabilities that that student may have. So I wanted to take a moment here and look at a teacher's guide to special education. So this chapter is really important because it's really going to talk about student behavior. First off, we need to figure out what are the underlying reasons for behavior. So what are the reasons that the student is displaying the behavior? Well, most of the time, behavior is a communication. So they're either trying to get away from something, avoid something, or they're trying to gain something. Those are the two main things that you'll see that they're communicating with you. So it's important for you to reflect on what are they trying to communicate? Are they avoiding something or are they trying to gain something? This could be intention. Another thing is that they're trying to tell you that they are either bored, they're uncomfortable, or they don't understand what's going on. Okay, and this is when you will most likely see these behaviors represented. Sometimes it's the environment, right? So think about those students who have those that may be on the spectrum or have sensory overload. The way that you set your environment up has to be conducive to supporting that student's disability or need. So there's a lot of things you have to look at. You have to look at your lighting, which sometimes cannot be helped because that's the fluorescent lighting. This is an issue for some with special needs. Is there a lot of visual distraction? Do you have a bunch of bright colors everywhere? Do you have a loud classroom, right? What does your seating arrangement looks like? Where are you placing your materials? Where is your furniture placed? So all these things really have to supporting the student's needs. So that's something else that you need to look at. Another thing is this a learned response? See, some students have problems, problems, and they're not held accountable, and they've been able to get away from it for a long time. So one of these things we call it learned behaviors, or learned helplessness. So because a student may have a disability or special need, sometimes they get away with some things that other students won't, and they're not held accountable for those actions or lack of work, or maybe they aren't participating, or they make noises and they're not sitting quietly as they should. So these are things that they've learned over time, and then they don't have repercussions for their actions. So that's another reason why this behavior is being displayed. So you have to remember there's ways that we can change the behavior, but there's a lot of factors we have to look at. Look at what you can control, and that's what you focus on, right? The things that you can control will be, how do you manage your classroom, okay? What does your classroom schedule look like? Do you sign a lot of paperwork? Are you always have them sitting where they can't move around? Do you put a lot of deadlines on work where you're not being flexible? What does your rules look like? What are your procedures? Do they actually understand what you want them to do? Are you reinforcing the rules? Are you following through with what you say, which is a big thing that new teachers sometimes don't do? What are they expected to do during that downtime or those transitions? Do they actually know what's expected? See, another factor too is we have to look at certain questions, right? So we have to reflect on, is the problem me? You know, like we just talked about up top, things you can control. But you should ask yourself some questions about your classroom setup, going back to that environmental component, right? So that encompasses the universal design for learning that you'll be talking about and learning about as a teacher. So how is your classroom set up? Is it organized? Can they locate materials very easily, right? Are my transitions very smooth and fluid? Do I plan for transitions very well? Can I reduce any auditory or visual stimuli where it's not overstimulating my children? Are there boundaries clearly set for behaviors established? What are the certain activities that I'm asking students to do? And do they know what to do when they have downtime and they're finished with their work? Because a lot of times these questions that you answer can really give you a clear insight into maybe what the behavior is, and maybe it's something you need to change, right? So in order to define the behavior after you ask yourself these questions, is you really have to define the behavior. We have to ask, is it a learned behavior? Is it something that has to do with your environment, or is it something that they're trying to either communicate to you, whether it's avoiding something or gaining something? So here's some list of terms that we always or often will use when we're describing certain behaviors, like weird, lazy, they have a bad attitude, they're mean, they're disrespectful, they cause problems, something just seems off, okay? That's not an appropriate way to describe certain behaviors. We have to define the problem behavior in a more measurable and concise way. So we think about those inappropriate terms up here, and the reason they're inappropriate is because, number one, it doesn't really, right, describe, and it's not specific enough to tell us what is happening. You can explain this to someone, but you can't really observe it and measure this type of behavior. So this is not going to help us when we are trying to define the behavior. Another thing to think about is a lot of those terms are judgmental. So it's not helping us be specific to try to figure out how to resolve the issue with these behaviors and replace it with something that the student can try that is more appropriate. So we have to think about descriptors that are more accurate and concise. So maybe you say, instead of saying the student's never listening or is disrespectful, maybe you just say does not complete class assignments or argues when given a direction. Maybe they touch other students. Maybe they talk all about subjects that are off topic, or they talk out without raising their hand. They talk with only two other students in class, okay? So these are ways that we can be more specific with our descriptors. So after we do that, we're going to start recording. And we're going to learn a lot about this in the next 2 weeks. We have to record the behavior. We have to have some data, right? And there's different kinds of data that we're going to record. There's different types we can use. So we can do rate and frequency recording, which is involved counting the number of times the behavior occurs in a specific period. So, for instance, say that the student is tapping their pencil a lot within a certain amount of time, right? Or maybe this helps us to figure out maybe this is only happening on certain times or periods. So it's really honing in on when is this happening. The duration is really documenting a behavior of how long it's persisting. This is if you're concerned about it persisting for a length of time and it's very severe. Okay, so that's when you would be using that. So maybe this student is throwing tantrums, or maybe they're in the bathroom a long time. So these are behaviors where we're looking at the length of time, not the frequency. The interval recording is really when you're observing it in smaller time periods, right? So this occurs at a high frequency rate, but we're looking at it if it's only once during the time period or the entire time. Okay, that's what we mean by interval. Now, latency recording is really where you're going to measure the time it takes to respond to something you ask them to do, right? If you ask them to put their materials away, how long does this take? Go sit at your desk, begin an assignment, the transition period. That's where you would use the latency recording. And then behavior scales are really various forms that help you rate how the student compares to their peers, right? And how the behavior changes over time. There's more information in here. Those are the ones that I felt like were really important. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, what we're going to learn about, is something called an ABC analysis. So ABC analysis stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. In your book, in Figure 7.1 is an example of this form. And what this tells us is this is going to allow us to see what the trigger is. Okay, so antecedent is another way to say trigger. Okay, what happened right before that behavior was displayed? And then what was the consequence following that behavior? Okay, so when we're considering the context of the behavior, it's important for us to record what happened immediately before the behavior started and what happened to the student immediately after. Okay, so that's what we call an ABC analysis. So here you see in the sample that we wrote the date and the time, how long the duration of the behavior, so how long it lasted, what happened right before the behavior occurred. We're going to describe the behavior, and then we're going to look at the consequence. So here we see, what was the behavior? The student climbed under the table and refused to come out. Verbal and visual cues were used to coax the student out. So this is the behavior that keeps getting displayed. Now remember, when you're conducting the ABC analysis, it is already at the point where this is something that continually happens. Okay, so it's chronic behavior. It's not something that maybe happened one time out of the blue. If it's just a behavior that's out of the ordinary, you would not conduct an ABC analysis of this. You would only conduct it if it's something that continually happens. So let's look at what happened, what was the trigger? What happened right before the student climbed under the table? Well, the teacher asked the student to write a 5-sentence paragraph and gave him a sheet of lined paper. Okay? Then what followed that behavior? So once the student climbed and you tried to use verbal cues and visual cues to coax them out, what happened afterwards? The student did not have to complete the writing assignment. He came out after the class left for PE. Okay? So the student did not have any consequences. There were no repercussions for this action, this behavior. We have to look at, based on this, okay, to me, it seems like the behavior being displayed after we look at the consequence given to the student, really there was no consequence. The student came out after the class left for PE. If I'm looking at this as a teacher's standpoint, I'm looking at the students communicating something to me. They don't want to do this assignment. Maybe they're afraid of writing. Maybe they don't feel confident. Maybe they are developmentally delayed in the writing and reading aspects, and that's what type of learner they are. So maybe they're fearful and really scared, and this is the way they're communicating. I'm not confident. I want to get out of this. I can't do this. Under any circumstances, I'm not doing this. I'm freaked out. I'm scared. That lets us know there's something bigger going on here, okay, that we need to intervene. So really the purpose of it is to see what the triggers are, what's setting off the behavior. This data is really helpful, and it does take a lot of time. It's labor intensive to gather this. You're going to have someone in there with you to work with the other students while you do this. Oftentimes, they'll send down the special education or someone on the behavior team, like a psychologist or school counselor, and they will conduct this or help you collect the data, right? And they will assist you in interpreting what's going on. Remember, it's not important for you to record all negative behaviors. It's important for you to look at the behaviors that are concerning and that continually are happening in the classroom. We also have to look at rules. Even if a student has disability or special needs, there has to be some kind of goals in there for the rules. There has to be some kind of guidelines that are put in place that the student has to follow like other students do, especially if we're talking about inclusion, right? So what we do is the school sometimes puts together what we call school-wide behavior policies. And what that does is it is a behavior system that's in place for the entire school. Well, if we have situations where a child may have special needs and there's behaviors implemented and that's challenging, we have to have frameworks in place for that, right? So we have something called the PBIS, which is known as Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports. So this is basically similar to response to intervention, but specifically this is aligned with behavior, right? So the first level in this is going to be looking at the school-wide policy, okay? These are things that we teach all students. This is appropriate behavior that all students should be at. The second level is where we have to intervene. So these are interventions for more serious problems, right? So examples of these could be small group instruction or even meeting with a student in a social skills club to teach them these appropriate behaviors. The third level is really chronic and serious problems, okay? So at that point, you would conduct ABC analysis and you would complete a functional behavior assessment. And then what would follow would be an intervention plan for that student. So this element or this framework has four main elements. We look at, are our outcomes clearly defined? Do we have a basis behind these behaviors? Are the practices and strategies we using research-based and are they effective? And number four, what systematic approach is in place to help enhance the learning experience for that child? The next one is functional behavior assessment. And this is something we're going to be looking at this week and next week. And this is where we have to see about classroom interventions and why they're not oftentimes effective. And the more that we do, the worse the behavior gets. At that point, we have a team in place, a multidisciplinary team. And we are going to consider giving that child a functional behavior assessment. So this goes beyond, right, of what the behavior looks like. Identifying factors to initiate, sustain, or end the behavior in question. So an ABC analysis at this point probably has already been conducted or will be conducted. So we're looking at we're zeroing in why the student's displaying this type of behavior rather than just what the behavior is. So we're not focusing on the behavior, we're looking at what's triggering the behavior. That way we can have a purpose and put a plan in place. Now, oftentimes the education teacher will work with the school psychologist and the special education staff to conduct these, okay? So here's some examples of some typical question. Does the student understand what to do in the situation? Does the student know he or she is engaging in unacceptable behavior? Can the student control the behavior? Sometimes they cannot. It depends on if that's part of their disability. And does the student have the necessary skills to perform the desired behavior? So we're going to look at where the student is, age level, developmentally, and then we're going to look at their disability. So all these are factors in answering these questions. Now here's some components of the functional behavior assessment. All of this is included and must be included when we complete a functional behavior assessment. So obviously we put the background information, right? Mental health assessments, medical assessments, their disability would be stated there. Any kind of family, developmental, or educational background is included. Then we're going to look at the target behaviors, those specific definitions, right? So including intensity, the frequency, duration, how does this adversely affect their educational performance? Is it affecting other peers in the classroom? Are staff included in this? Those things are important when we're conducting this assessment. The next thing we're going to really look at is the parent input regarding target behavior and strategies. Are these behaviors being displayed at home, or is this only at school? Are there behavior triggers? What are their consequences at home if this behavior is displayed there? Are they effective? What kind of motivators do they use or reinforcers at home or at school to get the child to do what you want them to do? Are there techniques that help calm the child? So these are things that we need the parents' input on to help us come up with this behavior intervention plan. The next component is going to be the student input, right? Where we're looking at what their perspectives are about the triggers. So, and they may not, it's depending on their age, they may not be able to communicate this to you. But having this input can be an eye-opener, okay? So why do you think that you're doing these things? Like, what, are you scared? Are you upset? And try to get them to open up to communicate why, or maybe get them to start thinking about what it is them doing. They may not even realize it, right? That might be an automated response for them. The next thing is we're going to go back to that ABC. We're looking at the antecedents or the triggers, right? We're looking at the setting, the classroom, where these things keep taking place. We're looking at the task. What did we ask them to do when this behavior happened? And what were some other possible contributing factors that we made a look at to see if that's part of the trigger? Then we're going to look at the student response to consequences. So what are the consequences of the behavior? Is it a big impact? How does it impact the peers, the student, and the staff? Then we're going to try to come up with hypothesized functions, right? So hypothesizes our understanding or our question. So what is the student doing when this behavior is displayed? Are they trying to seek something or obtain something, right, as a result? Or are they trying to avoid or get out of something? So normally your hypothesis is going to be one of those two things, what they're communicating. So are they avoiding something, right? Are they seeking something, trying to gain something from you or their peers? Maybe they talk out a lot and make funny comments and get their peers to laugh during class when it's inappropriate. They may be seeking attention, right? Even if it's unwanted or negative, they still need that. So these are ways that we hypothesize what the function of the behavior is. What are they trying to gain, avoid, seek? Then we move on to possible replacement behaviors. So now we're going to try to put these strategies in place. Let's look at, we're not saying, okay, we're going to stop this and you're not doing this no more. When you're working with children or anyone who has behavioral issues, we have to put a replacement in place, right? So instead of just going cold turkey and say, no, we don't display, we have to give them more appropriate replacements, right? So we're looking at what our target behaviors are. It should achieve the same function. So for instance, if they're trying to gain something, attention, and maybe the behavior is inappropriate, and they talk out and make jokes and laugh, maybe we replace it with, we give them some of our time in the morning or sometime today where we sit and talk to them one-on-one, because that's what they're trying to gain. Or maybe we have that little student where we looked at that example where we were doing the ABC up here, the ABC analysis, and we saw that the student is trying to avoid and get out of doing the writing paragraph. We understand that that student's avoiding it. This is their response because they're really upset and upset about having to do something that they don't feel confident in doing. And maybe they have a learning deficit here. So maybe they work one-on-one and you don't. Maybe you accommodate or modify the assignments and pull them out and work with them one-on-one or get someone to tutor them or work with a peer or they're able to modify this into an oral assignment to where we can help them where they're still meeting those goals and standards but in a different way. So we can replace it. So maybe instead of saying, oh, I want you to write a 5-sentence paragraph, how about we just start with a sentence, right? So we don't scare them and you work with them during that time or let them work with the peer to get that sentence out. And then you gradually move up and incorporate as their confidence grows. We're still having the students work on the standards and skills we want them to, but we're modifying it in a way to support them. So that's what we mean. Hold on, let me get back to my page. That's what we mean by replacement behaviors, right? So we work on those to get the desired behavior we want. We also look at preferred reinforcers. So even though we're replacing these skills, we want to reinforce and reward them when they're doing good things. So maybe they want a sticker, right? Little kids sometimes like stickers, or get a prize box activity, or maybe they get an event they can go to. So thinking, or maybe it's just having lunch with a teacher. So we're going to reward them and give reinforcers to them. Now remember, when you are working on these, you're also collaborating and having a partnership with the parent. So it's important for you to have that home to school connection. So make sure that the parents are also doing these replacement behaviors and that they are doing reinforcers at home. Now, we need to figure out if these behaviors are occurring because of a disability. Okay, sometimes they don't behave appropriately, but it's not something they can help. Maybe they don't understand the rules or expectations. So you have to ask yourself these questions here to find out whether the student has a disability or needs additional instruction, right? So maybe the student has a disability, and maybe they are uncertain about the appropriateness of their behavior, right? Maybe they don't realize they're screaming out loud. They're not aware of that. So we have to give them additional instruction and model what that looks like. Maybe, you're rewarding bad behavior, or they're getting rewarded at home with bad behavior or negative behavior. So every time they talk out and make funny jokes when it's inappropriate, when the other students are laughing, this is rewarding that bad behavior. Does this behavior occur only in certain environments, right? So just like that little student that we had up there that crawls under their desk, when you ask them, it is only happening during that time during writing, right? So what environment is this happening in? Is the student trying to get out of doing another task? So are they trying to avoid something? And what rule is the student breaking? Look at your school rules, your classroom rules. What rule is it that stands out that is happening? After we do all that, we're really going to develop a behavior plan. And so after we complete the functional behavior assessment, we're going to have to determine the function of behavior. So this is our hypothesis. This is done by a team. A behavior plan has to be put in place. Okay, so now a behavior plan can cover a wide range of issues, right? What the student should do in a specific situations, to broad statements such as how they interact on the playground with other students. But the behavior plan must be tailored to that student. Okay, that student has to have those supports in place so they understand appropriate behaviors. They have incentives to work toward those with specific rewards. So here's some tips that's listed. I'm not going to go through all of them. So really, the main thing to look at is looking at our results and how to ensure that the student knows what's expected is the most important thing. But please read these tips for how do we develop a behavior management plan, right? So we're going to use the information from the functional behavior assessment to determine the function the behavior is serving. We're going to look, so that means if they're trying to avoid or gain or seek something. We're going to describe the behavior in specific, observable, measurable terms, right? Not weird or something's off. Those are not specific. We look at what kind of goals do we want to develop with our team for the behavior, and we're going to make them positive goals. We're going to write down a plan, and this has to be communicated with the parent and the student both. Even if they're little, you put it on a level they can understand. You also have to have an acceptable a timeline for achieving these goals. That way you can gather data to see if this is working or not, and if you need to make modifications to these strategies. We have to make sure that these are acceptable behaviors and that they're taught and modeled, and then they're rewarded as replacements. right? So we're replacing that targeted behavior. And we're going to make sure that there's enough detail in this plan and that the student has a clear understanding of the expectations. We're going to address how other students in the class are going to be included, especially if this is something that other peers are having to witness this behavior or it includes or involves them. Identify who is responsible for ensuring implementation. So is it going to be you? If this is just something that's happening during the cafeteria, then the people who are up in the cafeteria will have to be responsible, so they need to be able to understand what to do. So these are things you look at, and it is written inside the plan. And then you always have to go back and always look at the plan, revise it, review it, see what's working, what's not, what do I need to change. And if it doesn't seem to be effective, maybe you reconsider the function of the behavior. So start back at the drawing board and see maybe you're getting it wrong, right? Maybe look at the replacement strategies you're using and the rewards. Figure out what could I change and what can I try next. Okay, so here are some sample charts for recording student behavior. So we've got stickers or smiley faces, if you will. So this sample chart, is showing you what questions are the student asking themselves. So this is a way for them to monitor their own behavior, right? Or for you to help them monitor their behavior. And you look here, it talks about different areas. So when I'm looking at this, I see start of day to morning recess to lunch break to afternoon recess to end of the day. So they broke the day up into components, which makes it easier for the student to record or the teacher to record. And then we're going to ask these questions. These were the target goals that we were working on. Were they achieved? If they were achieved during, so for instance, say greeted peers and adults appropriately, okay? So during the morning time, did this happen? Did this happen during morning recess to lunch? So in each parts of these days or components of the day, were these things visible, right? And if they were, then they get a smiley face. And this is how you would keep up with rewarding them. Another thing here to look at the bottom section of this sample chart is we have to make sure each goal, right, is successful. So keeping data. So this is where you can mark this into different periods of the day, right? So say a student has 7 periods. So then you are looking specifically at the goals, like is the child prepared for class, right? So mark each goal as either a 1 as successful or a 0. So in the first period, prepared for class is on time with assignment. If they did this and it was successful, you put a 1. If not, you put a 0. And you do it throughout the periods of the day. And this allows you to keep data on if this is working or not, what you're doing is working. Now, if you're working with a student with a disability, just make sure that you look at the strategies that work for that specific disability. Okay. So that's all of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 is going to be in a different text. So you're going to use your Exceptional Learners textbook. And in this book, you're going to really be looking at learners who have emotional or behavioral disorders. I also gave you a supplemental resource called Manifestation Determination in School Discipline. And there's a link there for you when you open it up. And so what the purpose of this is determine whether or not the child's behavior is what led to the disciplinary infraction. So we have to look at what their disability. So remember, IDEA recognizes different categories of disability, and each school has school-wide policy behaviors in place. So manifestation determination, right, looks at the student's disability to see if they could get any kind of disciplinary procedures because of their behavior. So like say they got suspended, okay? So IDEA says that under manifestation determination, it is able to limit the requirement to perform a manifestation determination to removals that constitute a change of placement, It does not require manifestation determination for removal for less than 10 consecutive days that do not constitute. So when is this going to be necessary? Well, if you're going to put a child, say, in alternative school, right, and it talks about who is involved. So this is important for you to know as a teacher, so please look at that. So part of your homework, too, that you're going to be doing is that you are going to be completing an IRIS module, okay? So when you click on assignments on below, you're going to see IRIS module. This one is talking more in depth about the functional behavior assessment that we went over in Chapter 7 of your textbook, A Teacher's Guide to Special Education. So you're going to go through this, and one of the assignments you're going to turn in is after you finish the IRIS module, at the end there's an assessment where you have to answer questions 1 through 7. You're going to copy them and paste them in a Word document, and then you're going to submit that Word document as a PDF, and you're going to submit it to Dropbox, okay? So that will just let me know that you understand the IRIS module. Okay, so there it is, and you will go to the assessment after you get finished. And once I click on it, you're going to see that there are 7 questions, right? So you're going to walk through these 7 questions and answer them, and then you're going to submit it. So what I have students do is I just have them copy and paste the questions into the Word document. So remember, you're not going to be pasting the video, but you will use this video below to answer the question number 3, okay? So just make sure that you go through it. There's also a chart. You can copy and paste it. You're going to complete the portions that are blank, okay? And then the last question, 6, is using this data on a student to see if their intervention plan is actually working or should they discontinue it. Okay. So all this information you will get from after reading. I would suggest reading Chapter 7 first before I do the IRIS module and do the assessment. But remember, this is what you're going to be pasting into a Word document and answering and then putting into Dropbox as your homework. I also did give you a PowerPoint. I wanted to walk through a couple of things on it. I'm not going to go through a lot of it for the sake of time with this video because we went in depth. A lot of this connects to your Chapter 7 in A Teacher's Guide for Special Education. But you look here again, it talks about the underlying reasons for behavior. So why is this behavior being displayed? We have to look at, are they trying to communicate something, right? Maybe they're not even aware that they're doing it. Maybe they're trying to avoid something or gain something or they're seeking something. Does it have to do with your environment or the environment they're in, or is this a learned response? Okay, it goes into the functional behavior assessment and how do we define a behavior. Remember, a behavior is something that is an action that can be measured or observed. It has a distinct onset and offset, a beginning and an end, okay? You have to make sure you define the behavior first, right? Defining the behavior and putting disrespectful is not going to articulate what is going on to a person picking this up, okay? You have to look at making it more descriptive and concise. Disrespectful, disruptive, off task, defiant, angry, and hostile, right? Then it lists the steps, which we went over, some in Chapter 7, is what are the actual steps of the functional behavior assessment? The first thing is I'm going to identify the problem. I'm going to collect lots of data and use multiple assessments. So that could be the latency recording. It could be the data from the frequency recording form. You can use your ABC analysis. So that's what we mean by collecting lots of data. And using more than one assessment is appropriate when you're doing a functional behavior assessment. You're going to analyze the data with the team that you're on. You're going to make determinations of what's going on and hypothesis. So what is happening? Are they trying to gain something, avoid something? Is this a learned response that have to do with the environment? You're going to develop and implement a behavior implementation plan to put in place to support that student. And then you're going to always monitor the progress and evaluate it and follow up with your team as necessary. And you can see in the PowerPoint, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in Chapter 7. You are going to just have this a little more in depth, and it goes through the steps with you. on how we conduct this, right? So what I wanted to draw your attention to is first you identify the problem. It gives us examples of how do we pinpoint what's causing this discipline problem, right, in concrete terms. So if we say Marco uses inappropriate language at school, this is defining it in a broad sense, okay? But if we want to use specific terms, we can put during outside play and or free time with classmates, Marco uses inappropriate language. So this is letting us know in what environment this is happening, which is important for later on. Is there a skill deficit? Does the student understand expectations? Does the student have the skill to perform the behavior? And then we're going to look at the data. Okay, when we collect data, there's two types. There's indirect data and then there is direct data. So indirect data would be things like interviewing the student and the parents and those rating skills you would send home. The direct data would be stuff like your ABC analysis or the frequency recording form. And remember, there's lots of different types of assessments you're going to use. And here it tells you about the different indirect assessment questions that you could ask. And then the types of direct assessments, right, which we went over ABC. So this is going to look again at the ABC observation data, okay, and your understanding of figuring out what that trigger is. And it gives you a visual, the behavior, when this happened, like what happened right before, and what was the consequence. Now, in this PowerPoint is a really good video for you to watch about a little student called Cameron. And this lets you understand what's going on also with Joseph. So please watch these. And then it's going to walk through like thinking about when you give that student a consequence, did it increase the likability that that behavior will occur again in the future, or did it just decrease the probability? So that's something we have to look at when we're doing ABC forms. Okay. So remember, that's all the stuff. I know it's a lot, but this is so important for you to gain an understanding of how do we do functional behavior assessments and how do we try to figure out the support or replacement skills for the student. This is a very much in-depth assessment that has to be done so we can give that support to the student and intervene in an appropriate way. So that will be week 7. We will continue on week 8 with this. Remember, this IRIS module is your homework, right? So you will complete this and then you will do the assessment, which will be put into Dropbox. So just copy this into a Word document and answer the questions. Don't try to copy the video, that's not necessary, but you should be able to copy the chart in there. You don't have to put this chart in the Word document, it's not necessary. I just want you to answer question 6. All right, so that is week 7. I even went ahead and put some key concepts. These are things that we went over and that you will see as you're reading in your chapters and going through the IRIS module in PowerPoint. All right, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I hope you had a good 2 days off this week, and I will be in touch. Take care.